Okay, I'm Pastor Dave Malinek, and this is Melvin Price. He's a member of our church, and we wanted to talk some here about the race issue and your experience with it, and so on. So, Melvin, you were in college pretty involved with affirmative action, that sort of thing. What all did you do?
So basically, when I went to college, I was a history major. I kind of chose history just because I liked history and didn't think I liked much else. And I really didn't think a lot about a lot of the social type stuff outside of experiences I may have had prior to. I think there was a couple of influences. I had an English teacher, Dr. Kumar, who definitely dealt more with social issues that kind of shaped some of my thinking at that time. I remember watching a video in one of her classes, and it was one of those news things where they send a black person in and, see how he's treated versus a white person that goes in. And I remember one of the students who was a white guy said, well, there could have been a lot of reasons to explain. And I remember I lit into him something fierce about, it's clearly racism and this, that, or the other thing. And about that time, I think there was a scandal there in our student senate where the current black student senator, I can't remember, I think he was running for vice president with someone else, and they had done something that hacked into the system they won the election. I think it was found that they had cheated. He had to resign from that office, and I can't remember. I don't believe that they held an election, but I ended up taking over as the black student senator at Weber State at that time, and so I want to believe it was probably the second semester of the 98 school year. And subsequently I was elected also the following year. And so in that I became a member of the Black Student Union also about that time. And I think a lot of the way I started to look at things, partially because of different professors and just the race relationship. And I definitely started to see things more through the eyes of we have been done wrong and poorly and whatnot. I remember even having a discussion with my mother about ways in which we can go and get reparations, that our whole 40 acres and a mule type of thing. And so I really just believe it was just because of the people that I associated myself with at the time just had me thinking more and more along these lines, because that was pretty much the gist of our thinking, was that we have been held back, and I remember in one of my history classes, a professor that I had, Dr. Dolph, which I like Dr. Dolph a great deal. He's a really good professor. He's probably not around these days, I don't think, because he seemed pretty old then. But he had us write at the beginning of the year, he said, we're going to have a writing assignment about an American hero that isn't viewed as an American hero in the history books, that was going to be our final paper for that year. And so I chose Nat Turner. And it probably didn't help that I think I got an A- on that paper. And the only thing that he didn't like about the paper was because I didn't go into great detail about, or to I don't know the best way to say it, but the fact that Nat Turner and his rebellion murdered a lot of women and a lot of children, you know. At that time, I think I probably did devote a paragraph to it, but it definitely glossed over that issue. And a lot of what I felt then was that, you know, in order for black people to, especially at that time, to gain the standing that they deserved to be at in America, it would take physical force. So back then I definitely was in agreement with the Civil War and the way slavery came to an end, and so just through a lot of that, my thinking was very much that black people had been done wrong and were continued to some extent. Even though for the most part of my life I don't have a lot of situations that I could look at, you know. So I was pretty much raised in white America, if you will, from kindergarten to the 8th grade. So I went to Catholic school, and I think I was, for the most part, the only black male in that school.
Did you find that people treated you differently, or do you think that there was a racial element to that?
So at the time I would have to say no, because I had friends and whatnot. And so then looking back, especially at times when I probably started to become a little more militant, if you will, I look back and realize that I really never got invited over to to go to birthday parties and sleepovers. And while my other classmates would, you know, and I would be excluded. And, you know, at the time, I never thought about it as a kid. Then I got older, and then I immediately just, you know, attached that, well, it was racism. And I don't know to this day if that's what it was. Today, I try to give the benefit of the doubt more, in that their parents may have only allowed them to have X amount of people over, and for whatever reason. But so things like that. It wasn't until I went to high school, and then that's probably where some of my things started to change, and that came more from the black side, because when I got to high school, so my parents had separated by this time, and I could have continued to go to Catholic school, but I knew the burden was going to be great on my mother, and I would have to go to a whole different city, like a half-hour away, and I just told her, you know, I'll just go to public school, which was a shell shock for me, to say the least. I didn't grow up in the most gang-infested area in Southern California, but it definitely was there, and you knew it was there. And I remember my 9th grade year, a black girl telling me, you know, and we were fairly friends. We sat next to each other in class, and we talked from time to time. And one day she told me, she said, you think you're white, don't you? And I said, yeah, no. I know exactly who I am. She's like, well, you talk white. And so I said, oh. You know, and so it caused a change to some degree, you know.
Did you find yourself wanting to act more black?
Right. And what I thought was and so used more slang, and even to the point that up until when I was going to college, my mother told me one time, she's like, son, it's funny because I can listen to you talk, and then if a black person comes up, you can hear the inflection change just in that time, and I was like, ah.
Was your mom unhappy with that?
No, she wasn't so much unhappy as she was just, probably curious as to why that was. And so I definitely, once I got to high school, started to hang out more with the black crowd. And I don't know, when I think back now, if I, especially later on in high school, if I had any real close white friends at that time. And it was about the time also that NWA was extremely popular in Southern California. The whole gangster rap was starting to come into existence, and I definitely listened to a lot of that, because my friends listened to it, and so I listened to it, and that's where a lot of that thought process came from. Even though I don't have any, or even then had any experiences with law enforcement and things of that nature, treating me poorly, this is what the music said, was going on, and so.
Did it change? Did the music change the way you looked at the police and white people?
It did. A great deal. Today, even having discussions with my wife, it definitely changed the way I looked at just women and white people and law enforcement and just a lot of things. And so like it's interesting because. I think it was just a week ago, we were going somewhere, and we pulled up, and there's a guy playing some stuff next to us, and I was heated, and I was thinking to myself, like Paul, and such were some of you, but my first reaction was to want to say something to him, like, hey, how about turn that down, because, but, so yeah, it definitely, during that time, shaped a lot of the way I seen things, even though it wasn't something that I necessarily, experienced, or at least not a lot of. And so by the time I got to college and was in this position, then I felt to some degree that I had to advocate more for it. And so I remember being at a multicultural conference at Weber State, and at that point in time, you start advocating, because I can see how Black Lives Matter people have slipped into all of this other stuff. But we're at the multicultural conference, and I didn't have a lot of time to prepare. I didn't even know I was going to be on the panel, but I remember a person stood, and it was a lesbian woman stood, and she was talking about the looks that they get in public and so on, and asked how to deal with that. And I remember I told my wife that there's some things that just come to your mind a lot that just bring some shame now. And I encouraged her to continue further, to the only way you're going to change the way people see this is if they see it more. And the more they see it, the more desensitized they would be in the future. And so then you think back, after your life has changed, and you're sitting there saying, I wish I wouldn't have said that. Because it definitely has probably led her further from God. But, at the time I felt like, we needed to change these injustices. I remember after that conference, I was sitting at a table with the provost of the school at that time. And he says, you are a very well-spoken individual. The first time the first thing I thought was, oh, that's pretty racist. And here I am, I'm a college student, I'm in student senate. You would hope that I would, but I guess it could be a shocker.
Right.
But,
if you've bought the stereotype, then it's a shocker to meet a well-spoken black man. Yeah.
And so, and that's just the way my mind just thought a lot back then. It's kind of like when we were having discussions about what you wrote on race relations, and like I said, it does become exhaustive or exhausting to see the racism in everything, because you really have to look a lot of times, and there's definitely not a joy or peace that you're going to find in any of that. A lot of times there's things that I think, another example, and I can't remember exactly what had happened, and this woman, she was somewhat of a friend of mine. I know that we talked on several occasions, and she was white, and she something had happened. She had said something or did something that had a lot of people in an uproar, at least black people in an uproar, that they were adamant that it was racist, and she didn't feel the same, and I definitely didn't come to her defense on that. I felt like I had to side, even though I could see how, like today, I could see people saying something and maybe had no intentions of causing any racial hurt or anything like that. And so, I'm pretty sure, because I don't remember talking with her much after that. And I just thinking back, I know we spoke quite often. I'm pretty sure she felt somewhat hurt about it, that she might have felt like, well, he may help me in this situation. And no, I'm pretty sure we just branded her as a racist, and who knows, to this day she may wonder why that was. And so that's pretty much how things went in my college experience. And,
So how militant were you? Like, were there organizations you were involved in, or?
Outside of the Black Student Union at Weber State, that was probably the main one. And so I haven't done a lot of research into the history of the Black Student Union and so on. And to be honest with you, I wasn't even really that active in it when I was there. A lot of my time was with Student Senate, but it was a situation where I definitely felt apathetic to whatever they perceived their cause to be. And so for the most part, I would say that in theory, more than anything, I was more militant, because I did believe in the idea of bettering race relations by force if needed. And that was more of my thought process, even though it wasn't something that I so much acted upon. It was just something that I definitely felt like, if that's the way it would go. Kind of like the situation when you look at going back to the Rodney King riots. And there was a man by the name of Reginald Denny early on driving a truck, took a wrong turn, and here he is in the middle of this thing. And he was drug out and beaten very severely. And I at the time, care at all that that happened. That was like, well, that, you know, you should have made a left instead of the right then, you know. And that was more of the mindset that, you know, not being able to probably just look and say he had nothing to do with anything that happened in that situation, you know. And, you know, whether or not Rodney King deserved all of what he got or not, I don't, you know, Reginald Denny definitely didn't deserve
that,
what he received because of their anger at that situation. And so that's more where that militantness was.
So what started to change your mind about the militant view of these things? By the way, before you answer that, were you a follower of Martin Luther King Jr., of Malcolm X, Elijah Muhammad, people like that? Did you study them? And who would you have been more favorable towards?
So yeah, I definitely studied Dr. King and Malcolm X. Wouldn't say that I was so much a believer in the things that Elijah Muhammad taught or preached, but I was leaning a great deal more to Malcolm X, just because he was definitely forceful in the idea that, you know, by any means necessary, we would secure these rights and things for black people. While on the other hand, I think I looked at Dr. King as being extremely weak back in those days. I definitely couldn't understand why he would allow, you know, the people he was leading and himself to be treated the way they would be treated. And you know, historically, Malcolm X had issues with Dr. King for those same reasons. And so it was part of the reason why I probably fell more towards Malcolm X, and you know, felt like if same thing with the Black Panthers that came out of California during those, you know, the 70s and late 60s, and so the idea that the only way we would be able to achieve this was by force, and or at least the threat of force, that we will use violence if, and so that's pretty much where my mindset was. Probably late high school, definitely in college. Was,
so what started changing your mind? Because you ended up backing off the militancy.
Right. And so I think that the biggest thing that changed my mind was coming to know Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior, and realizing, you know, especially over time, that how much my sin is a problem, and what God did that I could be redeemed, and just knowing that I'm a sinner, it definitely caused me to think differently about people, and to say, you know, okay, so here's this individual's sin, and maybe it is a racism issue that he's dealing with, and so then I'm thinking, you know, how is that any different from my sin that I'm trying to overcome by the glory of God, you know? And that's when I started to back off a lot of that, to just realizing that, you know, we're all sinners and we're all struggling. And it doesn't do me any good to number one, just sit around and think that all these things, because it's really easy to go ahead and say, well, I'm in a certain situation because this won't happen for me or that won't happen for me. You know, and then just knowing and understanding that none of that really matters, that God, you know, God's blessed me and my family immensely. And it hasn't had anything to do with whether this person's going to hold me back or not hold me back. God's in control of these things, and just trusting that, and then just realizing that, you know, His sin is no greater than my sin. You know, in the recent times, there was a black couple that posted a video on Facebook, or no, it was YouTube, and I didn't watch the whole video, I watched a portion of it, but they were talking about how their Christianity is at odds with their blackness, you know, because they go to church and people, they don't understand how people don't necessarily see the, you know, these atrocities that are alleged atrocities that we have going on around our country the same way they see them, you know. Which I just thought to myself that, you know, that is an interesting take, that your blackness is at odds with, because the way I understand the Bible, God doesn't look, and, you know, my blackness has nothing to do with any of that. That, you know, I'm a follower of Christ, and none of that matters. You know, it's not like I'm allied with something else. Like, well, I'm allied with Christ, and I'm allied, you know, aligned with black people, and this organ, you know, the Republican Party, and, you know, I'm allied with Christ, and so that doesn't matter. If I can see where they, to some degree, after, you know, reading your articles, and I do believe that they probably felt genuinely hurt by some of these things that they perceived as. One of the things that they brought up was the George Floyd thing, and they felt probably extremely hurt about that situation. At least that's what they were saying. You know, which one of the things that I've said from the beginning with that is that, number one, I definitely shouldn't happen, and it should never happen. With that said, like I told my wife, to try to temper some of, because, you know, sometimes I think my wife can be more, you know, on the militant side, because her and the girls also tend to, I haven't noticed stuff, but there's been times that they'll tell me, like, why is he staring at us like that? You know, and I'm thinking, I don't know, I haven't noticed him staring, but I don't know why you notice, you know. It really doesn't matter why he's staring. But, you know, so yeah, she was definitely wound up. And like I told her, I said, number one, I don't know that there was a racial thing. I don't know that was a racial thing. Bad policing thing, sure. Why it was a bad policing thing, I don't know what those motives are. Now, 20 years ago, I would have probably been just like everyone else and said, nope, clearly it was because he was black, and it didn't matter. But so now I definitely try to give the benefit of the doubt in areas, and like I told my wife also in that situation, it may come to, we may find out that it was a racial thing. And at the end of the day, you know, does that make it that much worse that he killed him because of a racial thing, or he killed him for, you know,
whatever reason?
Right.
Yeah.
So I mean, to try to keep those things in perspective, and also try to temper a lot of, I try to look at, like me and my wife just had a discussion before we left, and we watched this video. I can't remember what the young boy's name is, but the 5-year-old boy that was shot in the head by his black neighbor, and that's just a horrible situation, and my wife was wanting that, I hope they find some way to punish him. And I was like, well, it's a horrible thing, and I don't wish that for no parent or child. At the end of the day, like I asked my wife, when we start talking like that, what are we asking for? What are we wanting? And like I said, I don't know what's going to happen in the long run with that person, but do we hope or wish that he'd be saved? Because when we ask for the worst that can happen, there's only so that, like the Bible says, we can destroy the body here on earth, and that's it. God has the ability to destroy the soul. Are we asking for that?
Right.
And when we ask for that, how do we look at our own sin then? We say, well, you know what? I'm not that guy. I don't do so. He deserves that. But me, and like I told her, I said that we really can't think like that. We can't, So I don't know if he'll be saved, or if the opportunity, we should hope that. But if that doesn't happen, God makes it very clear that we don't have to worry about that, because He will deal with that. So that's why I've taken steps back to say, what good am I doing? Holding on to, harboring things that may or may not be what I think they are. And since then, I can definitely say my life is a lot better. There's a great deal more peace that I have in my life. Not going ahead and saying, well, you know what? The only reason why I was laid off of this job was because I was black. They kept the white guys. What good does that do me?
And I think you said a minute ago, said it right, that gets pretty exhausting, trying to see the race and everything.
And that's pretty much how I've come to be where I am today. And talking with my mother, it was probably the place where she was probably hoping that I would end up someday, I guess. Like she told me one of our recent conversations, she said, whatever you do, don't say any of these things around your sister, though, because she's not there. She's not there at all.